So, what we have here is we've had 3 reunions in the past, and this is the 4th reunion. And those are some of the pictures of the books that we handed out then. Next. Here's a picture of that first reunion. There were about 100 plus people there in California. Is the reunion that we had in Italy in 2018, and we have over 70 plus people there. About 30 from the United States, and the rest from Italy and other countries that are there. This is the one that we had at Mark and Vina's house, and there, we have a small number there. Okay, and now we're here in 2022, and I think we have over 90 people here, so congratulations.
Well done.
All right. And those are the people that have been involved in the past, 2018, 19. Okay, we're going to talk about the descendants of Giovanni Battista. 5 children, but we don't know anything about the 2 that are at the upper part of that graph, that chart, but we do know about the 3 that are below. And so we're going to talk about them. Giuseppe, Antonio, and Emilio. This is a picture of the Giovanni Battista house in Italy, and we were able to go into that during our visit there. And there's a street view on the upper left-hand corner. There's a down the street view on the upper right-hand corner. It's the last house. There's a picture from the backyard, and then there's an aerial photo. And if you can move it up a little bit on that aerial photo, you can see there's a courtyard. The house is the one that's the bigger house roof on the upper side, and you can see the farmland around it as well. Okay, I want to talk about the people who are descendants of Giuseppe Angelo. And the red boxes refer to the people who emigrated, their families emigrated to the United States. They came, literally. They are the ones who came to the United States. You have Edoardo, Terzialla, Luigi, and Dante. So, okay, on the right-hand side, on the corner there, the Dante folks. They're all brothers and sisters of each other. Now, there's Beatrice, who got married, and we just recently were able to find more out about her, but she didn't come to America, so not doing it. Oh, there we go. What I want to show you here is something that's very interesting. My grandfather, Edoardo, when he was 8 years old, was sent to another place, another town, to work with his relative in a butcher shop. His job was to scrape the meat off the bones, and then they would use that meat to make sausage. And he was given room and board for being able to do that. And I'll address this a little bit later. Okay. After he came to America, Gemma had come to America, and they got married about 3 years later. So you have first cousins marrying each other. In Italy, you have Terzialla and Alfredo getting married to each other. Again, first cousins. And that's going to be very interesting, because I'm going to talk about how could that happen. I mean, I have cousins. I would never marry them. You grow up with them. Why would you marry them? Anybody here married to their first cousins? Come on. Doesn't make sense. All right. Moving on. And then of the next family of Antonio, you have Alfredo, Pericles, Gemma, and Rosa. And the only 2 that immigrated to the United States was Alfredo and Gemma. Rosa stayed and ended up being the owner of the Battista home that we got to see in 2018. There's a picture of my grandfather and his wife, Gemma, Accomazzo, first cousins. He was a big man. He was a strong man. He worked as a butcher at the age of 14. and you had to lift up sides of beef. And a side of beef could weigh anywhere from 200 to 400 pounds. And they would bring those off of wherever they came in and control them and go. And so that's my grandfather, a pretty terrifying guy. He was big and strong. Now his cousin Alfredo was the lover of the Accomazos. And so even though he came, he didn't do the manual labor that my grandfather would do. Okay, I just wanted to show the Emilio descendants. You have Nina, can't read it, Santina, and Luigi, and Joseph Orsi immigrated to the United States. In my studying of what's going on, we're all here because of this one man, Edoardo. He was the first man to come. I would like to know what motivated him. Why did he come to the United States? I think you said something about being too populated, and there were some pressures of some kind. So the story is going to start with Edoardo at the age of 8. He is no longer going to be in San Desiderio, he's going to be in Casale. And that's where he's going to learn how to be a butcher. And why did he have to leave the house? And this is my theory now. Well, it was expensive. You had to feed him. So one thing would be, he can now go and earn his own keep, board and room. Okay, let's look at Giovanni's descendants. We have Beatrice, she's 10. We have Edoardo, who's 8. We have Terzialla, 6, and Luigi, 3, and Dante is a baby. So what do we have? We're going to take Edoardo, we're going to move him. We're going to move him to Casale, which is 18 miles away. And so he never knows. He knows of his brother, Dante, but he really doesn't grow up with him. That's an interesting point. Okay. Now we have, under the Antonio line, we have Alfredo, Gemma, and Rosa. Okay, Rosa's a baby, Alfredo is 7. I wouldn't be surprised that when Alfredo reached 8, a year later, they shipped him off too. And why is this important? Because now you have the cousins not growing up with each other. Alfredo, who's going to marry Terzialla, doesn't live with Terzialla. He knows her for a few years, but then he's 8 years old and he goes away. So she's just a little girl. And Edoardo, when he goes away at 8, Gemma is 3 years old. So she's just a little baby in the house. He doesn't know her. So these people grow up, and then they fall in love and marry as first cousins. My theory. Moving on. Okay, so I have him at age 8 moving to Casale, and then at age 14, he is now doing the work of a full-grown butcher. He knows how to cut meat, he knows how to carry it, he's doing the work of a full butcher. And so he asks his employer to start paying him because he wants to go to California. I want to go to California, I need money. And he says, I am paying you. I send the money to your parents. So he's working, he's earning a full day's wages as a butcher, but the money is going to his family. So he tells his relative, give me the money, I want to start saving it to go to America, and I will send support to my family, which he does. And because of that, it takes him 8 more years before he's going to have enough money to go to America. Okay? He's 22, and he purchases ship's passage to New York and then a train passage to San Francisco. So he's not even going to stop in New York or Boston or live on the East Coast like most Italians did. he's going to go all the way to California. And why he chose that, I really would love to know, but I don't know. I don't know. Fascinating. Okay, so he moves to Los Angeles. When he first he's in San Francisco. It's cold in San Francisco. He wants warm weather. Should have moved to Arizona. But anyway, he wants warm weather. And he finds out that it's warm in Southern California. And so he gets a job with the railroad digging a tunnel through a mountain. And he moves to Los Angeles. And he digs a tunnel through Chatsworth. And the work began in 1898 and finished in 1904. So he's employed. Okay. There it is. There's the, if you look at them in the book, you'll see that they have handlebar mustaches. And that's the Italians. And there's the tunnel. And yes. And there were actually three tunnels that got built between 1898 and 1904. And I actually lived very close by, and Janet and I lived in Canova Park, and our kids would play in a park right where those tunnels were. So it was really I didn't know my grandfather dug them at the time. So it was nice doing this research to find out I was there. Next. And so he finds a butcher shop and tries to go in and get a job, and the guy says, "I'll make you my partner." And so he becomes a partner with a fellow by the name of Bozio in 1905. And what my grandfather was able to do was he knew how to make sausage. And in those days, they had no refrigeration. So when meat was just hanging out in the open, and it starts changing colors. People don't want to buy meat that looks kind of spoiled, so they would cut off the meat that was kind of spoiled looking, and he would make sausage out of that meat. And so he took this man's business that was losing money and made it into a profitable business. And so the butcher shop became very successful. And then they had some kind of tiff, and he bought out his partner, and so then he owned the butcher shop himself completely. Next, please. And there's some pictures of it in the book. You can look at them. Next picture. Just shows the meat hanging in the open. Okay. Next slide. Okay, you can't read that, but it says basically he bought the shop, he made it successful, and he sold it in 1913, and he opened the first supermarket in Los Angeles. I'm saying that, but really it was a market, and we have a picture of it in 1930. And there it is. It's called the Broadway Market, and I have the next picture, which has some circles on it. It shows it's called the Broadway Market Company. And then another circle there on the lower right-hand corner says the number 704. Okay, and I'm going to show you documents later on where this address is repeated in the documents. So I just wanted to point that out here. 1913. So he becomes very wealthy. It's a very successful business. And so in 1921, he takes his family back to Italy, probably to show off. I made it. I made it. And so you know, and my dad was 12 years old at the time, and that's an important fact you're going to understand a little later. He's bankrupt though when the Depression hit. So he rode it up, very wealthy, went back to Italy, came back, Depression, it was a corporation. Eventually they said he tried to save it. He sold a lot of property that he used to own. He kept investing in, trying to pay his bills and everything, but it was a bad time. So he lost the business. But what he did was, my dad at that time was about 25 years old, in business with him. And so they just opened up another grocery store, meat market, butcher shop in my dad's name, and but it was still my grandfather's business, and so he never went out of business. He just didn't have the corporation, and after that, he never let my dad grow the business. He said, "We make a good living. That's enough. Be careful. You know, be satisfied. Don't try to get too bad." And my dad used to talk about, I had all these ideas. I knew how to grow the business. But his father said, "No, relax. Just be satisfied with what you have." So in 1949, though, they had enough money in the business that the winery that Alfredo, remember I told you, Alfredo was not the worker. He was the lover. And so his ability, he knew how to make wine. And so he went in the winery business. And he was very successful. And he had a partner. His partner died. And so now that became available for somebody to buy it up. Somebody knows what that number was. It wasn't a lot of money. It was a small number. But anyway, now Edoardo and Alfredo own a winery together. So the two cousins, the two first cousins, are back in business together in 1949. And there's a lot of good stories about that. And in one of the editions, and I know the latest one, you can read all about that. The Cucamonga Winery was called. Okay, this is a slide to just show timing. 1902, you can't read it. 1902, my grandfather, Edoardo, and his sister and his cousin, Alfredo, come to America. Now that, too, is an interesting story. Are you all listening? An interesting story. Remember, my grandfather had been saving since he was 8 years old to go to America. He's got the money. He goes and he buys his tickets. And by the way, he was either going to California or he was going to Argentina. Whichever boat was leaving first. Really? So we might not have been here. That boat, different boat. So he goes to California. When he tells his sister, "I got my boat ticket, I'm leaving," she says, "Oh, we're getting married in a month. Why don't you wait and we'll go with you?" What do you think he said? "Nope. Nope. You get married and then you come." And so 1 month later, Alfredo and Terzialla show up in California. So that's an interesting story. And then in 1903, Luigi, his sister, and Gemma, his first cousin, they come. Different months, they come separately. And Gemma's 17 years old. Can you imagine being 17 years old? Don't speak the language. You get on a boat. The boat comes to America, and you get on a train, and you go. And you go to L.A. Courageous. You know? Courageous. I mean, it's none of us, you know. Yeah, I thought I was pretty brave, but yeah, very good. All right. Oh, good. That's great. Thank you. Okay, these are ship's manifests. You can't read them, but what's important is this is Edoardo's ship manifest, and it tells me that the town he left from was Casale. It tells me that he's going to San Francisco. That's the second red circle. Next slide, please. And then it tells me that he's I don't know what it says now. I can't read it. But there's information there that's valuable that I can use in trying to understand what's going on. Okay. And I wanted to show you where these places are in Italy. Okay. You can't read the map, but the lowest circle is San Desiderio. And about 3 miles away is Cagliano, and that's that's been talked about, those two places. It's a municipality. This is talking. Sorry. And then Casale is about 18 miles away. It's the upper right-hand corner. So those are the distances involved. So it's a day's walk to Casale, and it's probably just a few hours walk to, a few hours walk. Yeah. Okay, now the next person that comes over in 1906 is Dante. And I know when Sally read to you that it said that Dante came over in 1905, and I believe that, except that when I found the ship, and I didn't find it, Robin found the ship's manifest, and it turns out he came over in July of 1906, and he wasn't 17, he was 18. Big deal. Doesn't matter. And this is just a picture of the ship's manifest, and there's the information there. But what the problem is, you cannot read the handwriting, and so the name that's there is not Accomazzo at all. It's some other name, and so that's why we never found it for a long time. And I don't know how Robin did her magic, but she found it. So that's how we know this accurate information. Next slide. And what does it say? I'm going to live with my brother, Edoardo. And he's in Los Angeles. And you can maybe make out that. And so the upper right-hand corner says it's in New York, July 1906. He's coming from San Desiderio, the circle, and then he's going to Los Angeles. So you see all this on the ship's manifest. Next slide, please. And there's a picture you've seen already of Dante. And then the next person to come over is in 1912, and that's Luigi. And he is of the Emilio lineage. Okay, not the first two that I talked about. So, and that's the Orsi line. There's just the ship's manifest. But what's important to link it to Edoardo is the address as to where he is going. He is going to 704 Broadway. And that's what this shows. And then there's another document, that's called United States of America. I guess it has something to do with immigration. Okay. And you can see down there, if you look where the square box is, she could probably read it off the screen, but basically it has that address on North Broadway, 704 North Broadway, Los Angeles. So this demonstrates that everybody that's coming over puts down the address of Edoardo's. So he is the sponsor of these people who are coming over. And then you have, in 1921, you have Giuseppe Orsi. Joe Orsi, as you knew him, and he comes over, and there are Orsis here today. And so it all goes back to Edoardo. Now, Luigi was sponsored by Edoardo, but Joseph was sponsored by Luigi. And as we used to call him, Lou. And then over at the far right, what does that say? Oh, there was Luigia was a sister. And Edoardo brought her over as well. She came over the same year that Gemma came over. And she married a Sepulveda, a Mexican. And they had Libero. And apparently he was not a very nice man, and he left her. And so she had a 1-year-old child and no husband. And so she went back to Italy, and she raised Libero in San Desiderio. And when he was 18 years old, then he immigrated back to the United States. But he was an American because he was born in America. And we have tried to get the descendants of Libero, the Sepulvedas, to come and to contact them, but so far we have been unsuccessful in getting them to come. Now we did get to talk to Helen. I grew up with Helen, and even Navina got a chance to visit with her, and she was living in Southern California. But her children just have not responded to our requests. So maybe in the future we will see the Sepulvedas. How did we get connected to the family in Italy? How did that happen? Well, this is the story. My mom and dad vacationed in Italy for 30 days in 1965. Dad had retired, and they sold their home and bought a home in the valley, and guess where? Chatsworth. Remember those tunnels? They bought a house in Chester. Of course, they didn't know that Grandpa had built those tunnels. So, and because they sold their home, they had cash, and they only put whatever 5 or 10% down, or whatever the small amount was then. And so they had enough money. And my dad says, "I want to go back to Italy. I want to get my roots. I don't know where we are. I know it's near Asti." And they had 30 days, and they just drove all over Italy. And the story goes like this. My dad is determined to find San Desiderio. There were no Google Maps in those days, 1965. And so you go in Asti and you say, "I'm looking for San Desiderio. I know it's around here somewhere." And they said, "Never heard of it." Okay, so he says, "All right, well, how many roads are there that leave Asti?" And it was like 4 or 5. And so he just took them all. And eventually, he stumbles onto San Desiderio. That's a good story, right there. Now, San Desidерio's got about 300 people. It's just 2 streets. So first thing, he gets to San Desiderio, he gets out of the car, and he says, "Hey, I want to find the home of Gemma Accomazzo." Anybody know where that is? And the first answer was, "Well, everybody here's an Accomazzo." So you're not saying anything that's unique. So he goes, "Oh, that's not good." So he's still on a quest. So it's, like I said, it's 2 streets. So he's driving up and down these streets. He gets out of the car. He's walking. And he was 12 years old, remember? Grandpa took him back there. He's 12 years old. His dad takes him back. And he sees this house. And he goes, "I think this is it." And remember, it was like gated. There was a courtyard. And there's an elderly lady in the courtyard. Just sitting there. And so he goes into the gate, and he goes up to the lady and says, "Is this the house where Gemma Accomazzo used to live?" And she said, "Yes, it is. Who are you?" And he said, "I'm her son, Mauo." And she said, "I'm your Aunt Rosa." Oh, fantastic. And then she goes, tears, the whole thing. And she says, "You have to stay. You have to stay overnight. Because tomorrow my grandson, Giulio, is coming to get me. And you have to meet Giulio. He's 18. Okay. So they stay. They meet Giulio. All right. So we know somebody in Italy. And by the way, Giulio and his dad and Rosa lived in Torino, or Turin. The house that's there was just hers, and she could go there for weekends or something like that, but she was not living there. All right. Here's a picture of Giulio, my uncle Edmund, my Aunt Mafalda, and there's Giulio. And so that was, how they find Giulio? Because my mother and father in 65 met this 18-year-old kid, okay? And this becomes a very important thing in the history of finding things. In 2003, my sister and I went to San Desiderio, and we had Professor Bottino, who always helping with the genealogy in Italiano, but a reunion in 2018, and there's Giulio and Mark and Bina in front of the Battista home, which we were allowed to go into. So it was just fantastic. I mean, it closed the loop. Thank you.